A library bill passed the legislature late last week, and with a signature from the governor, it could give insurance companies a much bigger role in deciding what you or your kids can check out from the library. Meanwhile, it's a wait-and-see week for lawmakers, waiting to see what Governor Little might do with the hundreds of bills sent to his office. But what about the bills that have already made it into law? We explain what happens after the official scribble. And we've been taking you through an in-depth look into Greater Idaho. Today, the way each state handles wolves is the center of attention. So Governor Little has signed 227 bills into law so far this legislative session. And as of this afternoon, there are 97 bills sitting in his office waiting for some sort of action to be taken on them. One of the last to be sent to the governor on Friday was House Bill 314, the library bill. Actually, it's called the Children's School and Library Protection Act, which is meant to make libraries and schools and museums proactively restrict children's access to obscene materials. And if they don't, they can be sued for $2,500 and damages. A civil lawsuit which wouldn't cost taxpayers a dime, we're told, according to the creators of the bill, because a successful case would be paid out by the insurance company covering said library or museum. Does that mean insurance companies will have an active role in deciding what books or exhibits will be available to the public? Just one of the questions we asked of one of the writers of the bill and a 30-year librarian.
The legislation simply requires that the school or library take reasonable steps to restrict children's access, whether that's putting it behind the counter, whether that's putting it in a section where only people 18 years and over are able to go, putting flags in the database so that minors can't check it out. There's a whole host of reasonable steps that a library can take to restrict children's access that comes far short of pulling the books from the entire library.
Is it just about restricting access or just getting rid of it entirely?
No, so the legislation, and we've been totally clear with this, our goal is not to ban books.
During that same Capitol Clarity on February 16th, you said,
we want the libraries to pull this crap out of the libraries.
Yeah.
That sounds a little bit more than restricting. That sounds like getting rid of.
Well, we would love to see libraries and schools pull this junk out of the libraries.
Why?
Schools and libraries do not have a First Amendment protection to distribute pornography to anyone. And so we want to see these materials pulled, but this bill 314, House Bill 314 does not do that.
Are there obscene materials in the library?
Not by the definition of the Miller test. We carefully look at all of our materials, and while there may be some adult books that have, a 400-page book, there may be a paragraph that has some language that might offend someone. It definitely does not meet the definition of obscenity. And we believe we are already taking reasonable steps by specifically shelving the books in age-appropriate areas.
Well, if they're not obscene, then they have nothing to worry about with this legislation.
Who declares it obscene?
Ultimately, again, it's going to be up to the courts and it's going to be up to the
But you're doing
judges.
it right now. You're saying that's obscene.
Yeah, so based on our expertise in this area, we've identified 5 titles that we think would meet that standard for kids, and just like any other type of action that takes place in our judicial system, it's going to be up to the juries to decide.
But a lot of these books that keep popping up have to do with LGBTQ authors, stories, and perspectives.
No, not necessarily. I would disagree with that.
However, 3 of the 5 books identified on the Idaho Family Policy Center website, 3 of the 5 they searched for in local libraries were LGBTQ based. Another is a sex ed book.
What we do know is that they're not taking the books in full context, and that's the problem. When we were listening to them during the hearings in the legislature, they were saying we're not for banning books, and yet people are finding things that they personally find inappropriate or offensive, so we never know what material on the shelf at any location in the library could cause someone to bring this civil action under this. And that, just the subjective nature of what people find with this law, we just feel that we have to find a way to protect ourselves.
Protecting themselves is where insurance companies come in.
Now, here's where things get kind of cool with the way we've designed this bill. Insurance companies don't want to pay out damages. They don't want to defend their clients. And so what they will do is they will change their policies the policies that the schools or the libraries are required to abide by if they're going to be insured by the carrier. And those policies are going to say, hey, you have to remove these books.
That sounds an awful lot like the insurance companies are going to create policies on what books are on the shelves.
And so the insurance company, to protect themselves from the liability that they would be on the hook for, would certainly create policies that the libraries and the schools would need to follow in the same way that libraries and schools need to follow other types of policies when it comes to maintaining pathways, shoveling the snow. Insurance companies are in this business of ensuring that their clients comply with the standard of care that's due.
Can you see an insurance company dictating what books are on the shelves because of liability?
I guess I wouldn't discount it completely, but it's hard to believe, and yet someone obviously thinks that that might be the case. And as I mentioned, we believe we are taking reasonable steps, and if they feel there's a step we're not taking, they need to express that to us because they haven't to this point. And so we just think there's a lot of either misinformation or miscommunication going on around this, and we would love to engage more and try to find out what it is that they're really seeking. Are they really seeking us, to completely remove the books? If so, that goes against our mission, because there are other people in the community who want those materials and in some cases need certain materials. So.
Mary said after the failure of House Bill 666 last legislative session, she figured there'd be some sort of dialogue between lawmakers and librarians to kind of figure out what is needed. She told us there hasn't been since the end of last year's legislative session. The Miller test, by the way, is the three-pronged guide to determine obscenity. It has to do with community standards, find out if it's patently offensive, and if it lacks serious literary, artistic, political, or scientific value, then it could be deemed offensive. Mary DeWalt, also the vice president of the Idaho Library Association. She told us today they have definitely seen a spike in the number of books being challenged. She shared some of those numbers with us today. These numbers are representative, she said, not comprehensive, so you can see they're probably most likely underreported. But going back to 2003, when there were 0 challenges filed throughout the state, according to the Idaho Library Association, skip ahead to 2015, those numbers hovered around 2 a year. Then you pick it up in 2015, yeah, it goes from 5 to 4 to 1 to 3, then 3 again to 3. Then in 2022, it jumps to 67 books. 67 books were challenged in 2022. And of those 67 books, 38 of them, more than half, contained LGBTQ content. 16 contained people of color, and 21 didn't have any sexual content in them at all. The content contained in most local libraries already decided by a policy set by an elected board of trustees, chosen by librarians based on the community they serve. And yes, this bill could change that. Governor Little has until Thursday to decide to sign House Bill 314, to veto it, or let it become law without his signature. As we mentioned, Governor Little has had a busy pen so far this session, signing more than 225 bills into law. Of the nearly 600 introduced by lawmakers this session, a little more than half, about 325, have made it all the way to the governor's office. All session, we've tried to take you through the process, and you know, Schoolhouse Rock does a decent job of explaining how a bill becomes law, but what happens after that? Joe Paris plays the curious kid in this analogy in the 208 version of what happens after a bill becomes law.
While lawmakers are in limbo to kick off the week, the quiet Capitol still has lots of work going on. Just check out the Idaho Secretary of State's office.
Really interesting being in this new role. A key part of the Secretary of State's office is being the secretary to the state. And so all the official actions of the governor, all the official actions of the legislature come here. We're the record keeper, keeping track of all of that.
Secretary of State Phil McGrain is working through his first year in office. Alongside his team, work is done here to officially get laws on the books after lawmakers pass it and Governor Little signs off.
Once the governor signs it, that's when a law becomes official, and it's for our job from that point on to take it and make sure that we can notify the world, get the session laws out, make sure that all the lawyers, the judges, everybody else know about what the changes to expect.
The governor's staff works closely with the Secretary of State team, and that includes hand-delivering fresh laws. Secretary of State team members like Lisa Mason make sure everything is accurate and recorded.
Once I receive these and work my way through them, I'll transfer this information onto the back of this bill and I'll assign it a chapter number. Every year, these will be published after the legislature adjourns, and they're all the laws that were passed for the year.
And they just get put out in books like that?
Yep, every year.
Even in the age of incredible technology, Secretary McGrain and his team are focused on pen to paper and then digital recording as a second step. Each detail is carefully confirmed for accuracy.
You can see everywhere from Speaker of the House, President of the Senate, Clerk of the House. So this is because this is a House bill. This is the process it's gone through. Part of what Lisa is doing also, though, is verifying. So the governor's signature, but you'll note the timestamp. So the governor has exactly 5 days, excluding Sundays, to sign a bill. And so part of her process, too, is to make sure it was lawfully processed.
Hard copies of the session paperwork are kept in a special portfolio, and they're also added in print to Idaho Code. Books are newly printed every few years for practical purposes, but a special insert is always added quickly into the physical session law books just to make sure that there's a placeholder.
We just had a meeting last week with the Idaho Code Commission, which is the group that oversees the dissemination of all these new laws and the information. And so it's our job to both digitize that. We're also the enforcer to make sure the timetables in terms of whether a signature was put on there timely or not, or if a bill becomes law without the governor's signature. We process all that information, but make sure that the legislature did all it was supposed to, that the governor did what he was supposed to, and then make sure to get the information out to the public.
As times change and evolve, the core principle remains. Lawmakers make laws, and someone needs to make sure those are tracked, maintained, and published.
There is still a lot of history to this building, that we are processing laws today just as we were when we became a state in 1890. I think that's one of the interesting aspects, and so many people, including the new legislators who've come on board, are just learning that process and each of the steps along the way. And it is quite a journey that a bill has to take from its initial idea and inception to make it through that entire process. This is it. We're the ones keeping track of it. We're the ones validating, making sure that it is the governor's signature and that everything is official by the time it takes full effect.
So here shortly after 5 o'clock on Monday, there's still plenty of paperwork on Governor Little's desk. So no news right now on some of the controversial bills that Brian was just talking about, but the governor basically has all week to consider it, really up till Wednesday, Thursday. It'll be interesting, though, because if he does make a veto, well, then maybe the session doesn't wrap up this week. Now, if all things go according to plan, if I talk to lawmakers, if that's their plan I'm talking about, the governor would sign off on everything and then they would wrap up basically on Thursday.
And usually each legislative session, there's not a whole lot of vetoed bills out there. And that being said, there's not a whole lot of vetoed bills that are overturned that we've seen already this session. So we've seen 2 bills vetoed, 1 overturned, but then we got that one. There's a whole lot to it.
Yeah. But there's still a little bit of work that's going on over in the big building downtown.
But they're waiting to see what happens with the gentleman on the second floor.
Which is interesting, though, because if for some reason he did veto something, lawmakers do have the ability to call themselves back now. So I was interested if that would change the circumstances. It doesn't.
It doesn't. All right. Thanks, Joe.
Yep.
All right, continuing our Greater Idaho coverage this week. You know that thing where Idaho is hoping to kind of just collect most of Eastern Oregon and call it our own? Well, today we're talking about wolves, specifically the difference in laws across the border. Pat Doris at KGW in Portland has the story.
Wolves returned to Oregon for the modern era in 2008. That was more than 60 years after the last one was shot and killed for bounty. They were not brought into the state, but rather allowed to wander in from neighboring Idaho, protected under the Federal Endangered Species Act. In just 3 years, the federal government found that enough gray wolves had returned to eastern Oregon that they could be taken off the endangered species list there. In 2015, the state of Oregon took wolves off the state endangered species list as well, although there are still restrictions on killing the animals. By the end of 2021, the state reported at least 21 different wolf packs in Oregon, with at least 175 members. This map from Oregon Fish and Wildlife shows where most of the packs are now located. See the upper right-hand corner of the state? That's where most are found, and that's where we are headed. We'll drive 100 miles north and east from John Day in a snowstorm to reach a tiny town called Medical Springs. It's on the edge of Union County and is home to thousands of cattle. Coleman Lay is a 30-year-old rancher.
I am the 6th generation, and my son is the 7th. My great-great-great-grandfather homesteaded up the road about 7-8 miles. About 125 years ago, and built a family here, and I'm the tail end of them, I guess. And my little boy and little girl are the 7th, so.
He has a degree in marketing and supply chain management from Boise State and loves this land and his herds of cattle. I visited during calving season. He has 1,000 mama cows, as he calls them. The moms of these 2 little ones did not survive. Coleman showed me how to give one a bottle of warm milk. When we were finished, I learned that around hungry calves, it's best to keep your guard up.
I think you're about done there, pal. Will they just stop, or shall I pull it out?
You'll hear, did you hear that air kind of go out? Yeah, that one's done.
Oh, a shot to the to say thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. Sorry, that's all I got.
A good lesson for a reporter from the city.
The Greater Idaho movement, to me, is more of the fact that there's just so many people who are so tired of, not having a say. They're like, hey, my life is basically being dictated by a completely other side of the state that has nothing, that really has no clue what we're dealing with over here.
While Coleman's working with the cattle, he has one predator that he worries about all the time: the wolves. And around here, it's not a theoretical concern. In early February, wolves came right here to his home and attacked and killed his dog. He shared this picture with us. We're blurring out most of it. It's too disturbing to show. He said ODFW biologists inspected the remains of his dog, named Dodge, and confirmed he'd been killed by wolves. Coleman said it happened overnight while he slept. Obvious question, but I'm sure you miss your dog.
Yeah, I miss him every day.
It's not the first time wolves have attacked here. Coleman shared this picture of a cow killed by wolves and said there are others. The state does allow some pushback. In late February, ODFW approved the killing of 2 wolves near Medical Springs after 3 documented attacks in pasture lands. On top of that, 3 more wolves have been legally killed in eastern Oregon this year for attacking livestock.
Yeah, this is a major problem. I don't feel safe with going on walks with my dogs. I don't feel like my family, I got to have an eye on them at all times.
There is a wolf kill compensation fund set up by the state legislature in 2011. It's a mixture of state and federal tax money that pays for prevention measures to protect livestock from wolves. It also pays for animals that are dead or hurt or missing. In 2022, the fund paid $393,682 for wolf attacks and prevention. The payout since the fund began totals $1,187,000. That's not much comfort for ranchers like Coleman Lay, who wishes Oregon's leaders on the west side of the state knew what it was like to live with wolves on the east side.
Okay, so for reference, Idaho is pretty much wide open when it comes to wolves. To drastically reduce the population back in 2021, we made it okay for year-round trapping for wolves on private property. Also unlimited purchase of wolf tags. And you can use virtually any method to take any wild canine in Idaho, like foxes or coyotes. In the 2021-2022 season, 50,000 hunters in Idaho killed 389 wolves, and only 72 of those hunters trapped and killed more than one wolf. Most of those wolves were in North Idaho, according to Fish and Game. The wolf population in Idaho is stable and has been since 2019.
My favorite appraisals, I'm a jaded producer. It's not about the money for me. My favorite appraisals are with a great story. They can give you goosebumps, true goosebumps, yeah.
Now, that was almost a year ago. Back in May of last year, we went to the Idaho Botanical Gardens to check out the filming of Antiques Roadshow right here in Boise. And those Boise-based episodes, they are airing tonight, the 10th and the 17th, on PBS at 6 p.m. Mountain Time. You can catch all the fun, the unique things that you lined up, have checked out by the experts. Maybe some of them will give you goosebumps. All right, lots of comments today on House Bill 314, the library bill sitting in Governor Little's office waiting to be signed or vetoed or just kind of let it become law. Are there any provisions in House Bill 314 to keep people from abusing this law, to keep it from becoming a cash cow for these people, asked Glenn. Kind of, I guess, because these civil lawsuits are so expensive, it'd mean a lawyer would have to look at that and go, yeah, that's a definitive win. Otherwise, it's just a waste of time and money. Same could be said for insurance companies. It'd be expensive for them as well to defend such a lawsuit. What about books sold in stores? Just saying, Linda. Well, this doesn't apply to books sold in stores. This is just applying to libraries and museums that are publicly funded. That's the difference there. I think the library issue is out of hand. It's the parents' job to monitor and approve what their kids read, not anyone else. If you don't like these books with content that you think is offensive, don't let your child read them. Isn't that hard to figure out? This one here, libraries have always been there for everyone and anyone who desires. Children still need adult supervision, and the rest should be left as is. Common theme there. Glad they're looking at inappropriate books in libraries that children have easy access to. Keep sexual books in a separate section for adults only. That's perfectly fine. Why is that solution a problem? Well, point is, librarians are already doing this. They're separating books, they tell us, by section. If it's not appropriate for children, it's not in the children's section. Go check it out for yourself. Well over 300 bills from the political party of smaller government. I would hate to see their versions of larger government, says Larry. This one, 314, when I was a cop in California, 314 was what we called indecent exposure. That's right, it is appropriate, like 666 from last year.